Thank you. Now we hear that you've had some great results. Can you fill us in with the details?
Well, it's an exciting milestone for us today. We've announced after a long time and a lot of work that we've delivered production from our Paradox Basin asset. We're in the middle of a production test right now, obviously. But this is the first time that a horizontal well with a modern completion has ever been tested in the Paradox Basin, and we're just beyond thrilled with the results so far. So I think, I like to take a step back always and think about what's gone on here to get us to this point. And obviously, I first got involved with this company because there was huge potential here, but there's needed to be a lot of work to get to this point. And I think back to Matt Idians and the team at Rose, who originally assembled the exposure here, and they funded seismic. That was the first modern seismic in the basin, and that was what initially attracted me to this company. Beyond that, we've done a huge amount of work restructuring our leases and our partnerships there in Utah, so we're highly focused on that seismic area. We got a U.S. government grant, which gave us the money and a research team behind it to do the first chunk of this well. We broke it into two bits, because it really needed to be done properly and carefully. Moving from that, there's been, 6 to 7 months of evaluation of those cores and logs to get to the place where we had enough confidence to develop a plan to go in and drill the horizontal lateral and hydraulically stimulate it. And I'm, again, just beyond thrilled with our team that it is unfolded to expectations, which is great. So I'd like to say a quick thanks, in particular to Bruce Hutchins, who's our Director of Operations, Dave List, who is, again, ex-Fidelity like Bruce and has just done wonders on the geology side, and especially Gregor Maxwell, who is overseeing this process from the very earliest stages and has done a phenomenal job getting us to this point. So it's all very exciting. We're still in the midst of this production test right now, but it's a nice milestone. It means we can get on with the planning for how to accelerate our efforts here and move forward quickly.
Very exciting indeed, and great news for Zephyr Energy. Colin, can you give us some more details on expected well flow rates and other expectations?
Sure. So I think it's important to remember that what we've done here is we have pumped huge volumes of water and sand down the hole in order to stimulate the rock. And so when you go through a process, which we're in right now, the flow back and completion testing, production testing, you'll see, can be many days of just completion fluids flowing back first. We expected that we would see completion fluid, then potentially natural gas, and then potentially oil. And that's the way it's unfolded. Every reservoir is different. Things happen differently in the Permian or the DJ, and even depending upon completion types, the stages might unfold differently. But here it came as we expected. And this is probably the most important aspect of what's, when you're looking at the results to understand, we've used a really highly restrictive choke so far. We wanted to make sure, because this is the first example of doing this, we wanted to make sure we would limit any formation damage. And we have a highly, highly pressured area that we wanted to make sure that our facilities wouldn't be too, overwhelmed with the initial production. So on a heavy choke, a highly restricted choke, we're flowing on average, since we've seen hydrocarbons, about 420 barrels a day of hydrocarbons, and 2 to 3 times that of completion fluids. When we reduce the choke even slightly, we've gone up to hourly rates of around 700 barrels a day. So what we're doing now is attempting to address the facility constraints that we have, start to reduce the choke even further to really understand what the maximum production here could be, because what we're seeing implies that we could get a fair amount of more production out of this if our constraints were removed. And secondly, we're still trying to understand the fluid mix, because right now, the rates are relatively volatile. We based all of our modeling on a well that's just to the north of us in terms of our gas to oil ratio. But, we'll now be able to start to understand actually what this well in this location is going to give us in terms of hydrocarbon mix and quality of oil and so forth. So it's all very exciting. The second thing that really encourages me is that typically at this point, we've recovered about 30% of the completion fluids. You would start to see, with these 2,000 barrels of completion fluids and hydrocarbons, you typically would start to see pressures reduce. We haven't seen that at all. Pressures have been consistent or even increasing. which implies we might have a larger connected volume than we thought. And again, something that's exciting to see from my seat, but we need a few more weeks of production testing to really understand what we have here.
Great results indeed. Now, what does this mean for Zephyr Energy as a company going forward?
Well, what's exciting, again, I don't want to overuse that word today, but what's encouraging for me is that this forms the basis of a much broader development plan for this basin using hydraulic stimulation, which will allow us to do more wells, greater lateral lengths, better completion types, but really to approach this in a systematic and careful fashion. But it significantly expands the resource play that we have here. So next steps, as I said, are finishing up the production testing, understanding the fluid mix, and then equipping the well. And lastly, the other thing we have to think about, because we do have natural gas volumes that are associated with the oil volumes we're getting, we have to think about ways to monetize the gas. We do have pipeline infrastructure nearby, and so we'll obviously be working to potentially tie into that infrastructure. Or secondly, in its early stages, but we're looking at other ways that we might monetize the gas right on our site. I can't go into details yet, but there are alternatives which I'm fairly excited about on that front too. So, fair amount coming in the next few weeks, and we're just thrilled to be in this position. And now the real work begins of planning how we continue growing through this asset as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Colin. Exciting times for Zephyr Energy, and clearly you're very busy. Finally, can you give us a quick update on the rest of your portfolio?
Sure. We released our numbers, our third quarter numbers today as well. And it's nice to see. I think it was fortuitous that we got into the non-op market when we did. We were able to acquire some assets at a good time in the cycle, and we doubled our production levels in the third quarter. From a relatively low base, and now we're at about 550 barrels a day in September. Obviously, some of those wells will begin to hit the decline phase, but we also have a number of other wells coming on in the fourth quarter. So we're going to see continued growth of the non-op. The reason that's important is the cash flow that we will get from that production is always available to be reused and to help accelerate the paradox. So I know I say this each time, but we still think it's a very good time in the cycle to be acquiring assets. Now that we have a better, more concrete idea of what we have in the paradox, I would love to bolster our resources, whether it's through JVs, financial partners, or acquisitions that give us more runway with cash flow. We would love to continue to build this side of the business as long as it's accretive and economic, so that we have more resources to properly develop the paradox out. That's where we are, and there'll be a lot more news flow in the coming weeks as this unfolds.
Well, it's a good place to be. Thank you very much for your time today, Colin.
Thanks, Catherine. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thank you for watching Flagstaff TV.